And just like that, we are back working on the S8. That was a little footage of Teardown from the last couple of weeks, but you and I are going to do some live testing today on the cylinder heads as well to keep things going and figure out what's been going on inside of this engine that had 280,000 kilometers on it. Also, welcome to Figure It Audi. If this is the first time tuning in, hi, my name is Steve. You'll find content here on the channel about DIY work on Audis and modifications to B7 S4, this S8. There's a new wagon in the garage, and really I just like to do lots of really good technical detailed work to help you maintain your own cars, save a little bit of money, and learn along the way. Really good detail is going to be what you can expect out of this series. I'm going to take my time. There is a lot I have planned on this car. I'm going to go through every system. I have a ton of upgrades that I'll talk about more in detail in the vision in a second. But really, I want to make sure that you're empowered to get into the garage and tackle literally any part of this car, because I'm going to be going system through system, doing tons of upgrades everywhere. And if you're like me, you do research once in a while on forums that have 20-year-old posts on them. Information is so-so, lots of broken pictures, lots of old YouTube videos out there that are kind of got some golden nuggets in it, but not quite enough for you to follow through and just do all the steps yourself. I want to give you everything that I've learned on this chassis to make sure that you could basically rebuild a car yourself. Now in this video, I'm going to tell you the full vision that I have for the S8. I have a really exciting community announcement that I'll tell you in a second. We're going to look at everything I found in the engine during teardown, and we're going to do a little bit more live testing together. I'm going to teach you a couple of things about inspecting a cylinder head to see what the final condition of the entire long block is going to be before I have to start working on this thing to build it back up. So let's talk about the grand vision, because what I see in the near future for this S8 is 6-speed swap, fully rebuilt transmission, fully rebuilt engine to make sure that it's super healthy but also can handle some future power from supercharger, and then resto mod the entire rest of the car, which means taking off, mechanically speaking, every single part, inspecting it, seeing if it can be refurbished or replaced or upgraded where it can be modernized if possible, to make sure that the entire platform is just good for the future. I've got lots of trust in the car, can be powerful and fun and have a whole new personality and really reliable and easy to work on in the future as well. Now you can tell that this vision is not incomplex or inexpensive, which brings me to my community update. I'm very proud to introduce the 4 Rings Club. Now you can get involved and support the channel in 2 ways now. One is through donations on the Streamlabs link that you'll see on the main page of this channel, but also the membership group here on YouTube. It's live today, right now. You can see the join button right below this video and on every other video on the channel and on the main page. This is a monthly subscription membership for $4.99. And what it's going to do is give you exclusive content for videos that I'm going to post all the time. You know, these big updates that I put on the channel are maybe once a month or so when I have lots of really good content and updates to give you. But in the meantime, I'm out here working every single day, nights, weekends, and I'm making decisions and thinking about things. And I'm going to show you basically weekly updates of what's going on, what I've been doing, and give you a chance to get involved, support me in the builds throughout 2024, and have a chance to influence these builds too with the information that you give me back in those videos. I know we're a small but growing community today. We're going to do some awesome things together over this year and into the future, and absolutely any support that you send my way will be used very consciously and go really, really far. So thank you. All right, let's get this show on the road. Let me show you first what I found on the bottom end of the block during the teardown. So the great news right off the bat was that there were no head gasket failures. Both sides were quite dirty below where the heads would sit on, but that was just leaks that were coming up from the valve cover gaskets that are usually, you know, like up here, and it was just dripping down and coating all the sides of the block. So no big deal there, but one thing I noticed pretty much right away was the fact that the gasket material has blocked the coolant passages, specifically the 4 water jackets here that surround each of the cylinders. Some of these passages are blocked fairly significantly actually, which would reduce the cooling effect on the cylinders and the overall flow throughout the block. Not so good. Now I know you all want to look inside the cylinder bores, and I'll do that in a second. I'll say for now they're about 9 out of 10. It looks really, really good. But I want to talk about what the block is actually made of. Heads too, actually. You might hear the term alusil, so that stands for aluminum silicone. There's actually a little bit of magnesium in there too. And of course, once you realize the element names are simply describing what the block is made out of, you understand that it's an aluminum alloy. Alloy is just being that it's not a pure element, so it's aluminum plus some other stuff. And the reason I'm saying that is because it might look on the surface that, you know, the block is clearly cast and this is a machine face up top. And you start to wonder, well, what is this? Because this looks different. It looks shiny and a different color and quite hard and smooth. How can that all be the same material? Well, it is. It just takes a certain process to get that finish inside of the cylinder bore. So the really fast science lesson here is that that hard silica layer that we just saw inside of the bore could theoretically be achieved anywhere on the block if you use the right process. It's just there'd be no point in doing that, right? We only need that hardcore protection in the cylinder. That's where the party is. That's where combustion's happening. That's where we have to keep that nice oil layer on the side so the piston can move nice and freely. That's where we do it. Now, the process is more or less that when the block is poured, because it's just a cast block, and basic machining is done, like to punch a cylinder hole out, what you're left with is still just alusil. Now we need to remove the aluminum part of that, and a chemical is applied that eats away aluminum, so it's only left with basically a hole with exposed silica bumps, because it's still bumpy at this point, around the inside of the bore. That's when you do your honing. That's when you take the felt pads and you smooth out that surface so that the piston rings can glide on it really nicely. Now what's unique and really interesting about this, look inside of the cylinders, there's no cross hatching, and that's okay. That is the unique part about the alusil block and how it's honed, is that you are not depending on a cross hatch pattern to retain oil on the side of the cylinders. You actually just have that hard surface and then a really good oiling and rings on the piston itself to make sure that combustion is held in there and there's not a lot of blow by and you're sealing up the cylinder really nicely. So it is very important to make sure that the inside of the bores on an alusil block are performing correctly. All right, let's take a look at the passenger side. This is bank 1, front of the car would be this side, so cylinders 4, 3, 2, 1. Number 4 is pretty damn good. There is only 2 little marks from some ring wear down at the bottom. They're about an inch long. Can't feel them by hand at all. Really not concerned about that. Cylinder 3 looks really, really good. Honestly, nothing to speak of in there. Number 2, likewise, some very, very minor scratching from ring wear up at the top. And then number 1 is maybe one of the worst, and that actually doesn't say a whole lot because it's still not that bad. Up near the top here, where around top dead center would be in this cylinder, we've got some ring wear that doesn't go vertically, kind of goes side to side. So not exactly sure what that's an indication of. And then we have some more light scoring that runs a little bit longer, probably goes 3/4 of the length of the cylinder. So there was definitely some wear going on there. We'll have to take a good look at the piston and bearings for that rod when we go and look at that on the bench. Flipped over now, we're looking at bank 2, the driver's side, 8765. Honestly, for the back 3, nothing really to talk about. 8 looks amazing. 7, nothing notable. 6, really good too. The front ones seem to be the ones that have a little bit of wear, but that being said, 5 is much better than number 1 was. This one just has a little bit of bore scoring. It seems like it happens more so towards the exhaust side of the cylinder, but pretty darn good. And now the block is flipped over. So we're upside down. Keep in mind that those holes that you're looking at down there, it's actually the top side. That's what feeds oil down onto the crank. Doesn't really matter. Back of the car, front of the car. I've already taken off the main bearings, and I'll show them to you in a second because they absolutely tell a story. But what's also really important is that when you disassemble a block like this, you have the factory service manual because it tells you some very important things. Do you see the letter G that's right there? Now let's take a look at this. R, G, G, last G up here. Without the manual, you wouldn't have realized that there is a corresponding set of main bearing thicknesses that's what it means. So RBG also corresponds to colored dots that you should be able to find on the bearings. I couldn't find them on mine. They were washed off of red, blue, and yellow. And although they don't tell you which one of those 3 corresponds to what thicknesses, like small, medium, large, I don't know if it's like 1 thou, 2 thou, 3 thou over, I'm not totally sure what it equates to, but obviously they measured the tolerances around the crank and the bearings and realized that the far back one towards the firewall needed to be different than all the others. But since the bearings are removed, and I've already cleaned these up, look at the story that the main caps say. Now, keep in mind this is the top of the engine. I'm not saying that the bearings were spinning, but something got a little hot up in front here under cylinders 1 and 5, which is not the same as what we see on the second main. That looks really good. Third, we've got a little bit of action up here, I think. Fourth, if you look down right in the bottom in the middle, we've got a little bit of wear right here. Number 5, holy, volcanic activity. Got really hot up on both sides here. Now let's look at the bearings themselves. Front of the car, rear, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in terms of caps. On the rear, now this is the bottom, absolutely smoked through. That main protective layer on here has been worn right through. These bearings absolutely needed to be changed for sure. Here's the top of that shell as well. You can see right up at the top, very much worn through. Here's the bottom of bearing number 4. Remember, this was the main that we saw some very concentrated wear right down at the middle. Well, check that out. This one has been worn like number 5, but even more so dead center, maybe even lower. That was going to be trouble. Number 3 is similar in the sense that it's certainly worn, but there's a concentrated, little bit smaller spot this time right in the center. Looks like there was an issue towards the rear of the engine. Number 2 looks good. This is just like a regular worn old bearing. Nothing crazy. Certainly worn around the top layer a little bit, not through anywhere. It was time to replace these, but no concern on this one. And before I flip over number 1, also take a look at the color scale here for how much heat was seen down on those mains. Back one there, pretty toasty. This one, a little bit less so. This is still a little bit warm. Number 2 was actually just like nicely well worn. I don't know if it comes across in the video very much, but this is just like regular. Look at number 1. This is the darkest one by far. Here's the other side of number 1. Look at this very unique wear pattern here. Pretty much 50% right down the middle, worn really badly towards the front of the car, whereas the back half of it looks actually really good. We have a real mystery on our hands though, because according to the block, this is the shell set that should be different than all the other ones, but it's not. In fact, it's opposite. The number 1 bearing set are different. I've gone ahead and I've documented the part numbers of the tops and bottom bearings, plus any other coating, because there's 2 other sets of insignia on each of the shells. And what I'm seeing is that 5 through 2 are all identical and 1 is the different one. Now I know what I'm about to say seems a little far-fetched, but trust me when I say I've kept those bearings in the perfect order. I know exactly which ones were 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. I can also tell because when I was disassembling the block, I noticed that it got worse towards the back, and that's still the same order I'm seeing on the bench. So I know the main bearings for number 1 are number 1. And what I actually think happened is the factory did the proper measurements. They went into the part bin and they got 4 sets of one and 1 set of another, and they put them in the wrong place. I think somebody mixed up the front main number 1 for number 5, and they actually installed them in the wrong place. Now I'm going to add to this wild theory, but hang on with me because I think this tracks. I think that when they measured for the mains number 5 on the crank, they saw that the tolerance was too wide. So that unique set of bearings that should have been back there, they went and grabbed a set that were extra thick, which was correct. However, when they put it up on main number 1, what they did was 2 things essentially. 1, they made it too tight up there because the tolerance was fine, which is why we see that extreme amount of wear on the front. But also what it did was it put an imbalance in the crank, and it actually sort of like tilted the pressure so that it got worse and worse as it made its way towards the back, which is why we see it get bad on 3, worse on 4, and then really bad on 5. What do you think? We can do one more really interesting test to see if our thrust washers are worn. This is information that you'll need out of the service manual, but basically what we're going to do is called measuring the axial movement of the crank. Check this out. So here's the situation, how you set up the test. Right now, I have the bearings back in the block. So I put the top bearings back under the crank went in. I put the bottom bearings back inside of the caps themselves, and then I just snugged down the caps, and what we have right now is a lubricated crank that's freely spinning inside of the block. What I've got rigged up on top here is a dial gauge. Now you can get this exact same setup on Amazon. I'll put the link into the description of this video. And out of sheer luck, I can't even believe it, the threading on the bottom of this rod fits perfectly into the holes that are available on the top of the main caps right there, which is great because you need to have this dial affixed to the block itself. You can't put it on something freestanding or else you'll actually capture the movement of the entire stand and the block moving itself. So I have this fixed up here on the cap, and I've got my dial gauge kind of tuned in here so that its needle is right on the front edge of the crank. There we go, focused in nicely. And then I'll have the gauge zeroed out right about here so we can start our test. This entire test is designed to see what the tolerances still are of our thrust washers. You can see the silver tab that's sticking up there. That's one of them. There are 4, 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom. They're only on journal number 3. And the crank should be able to move a little bit, very small. We're talking about really small numbers though. The wear limit is 1/4 of 1 millimeter. So essentially what we're going to do now is just push the crank around a little bit. It's already maxed out towards the front of the car. We're going to push it as much as we can towards the back of the car, and we'll watch the dial indicator to see how many, I think it is 10 thousandths that we'll see movement on this gauge. Granted, this is a home measurement system. A machine shop would do a much more accurate job, but after a little wiggling back and forth, what we were able to observe there was that we got the dial to move about 1 entire graduation. It was about 0.5 below 0 to 0.5 above 0, and on this type of dial, that equates to about 10 thousandths of an inch, and that is just slightly above 0.25 millimeters because that would equate to 0.0098 thousandths of an inch. which means that we need to change out our thrust washers, which of course makes sense. I would have done it anyways. It's just a really cool practice because once we freshen them up, we can do this test again. And now we want to see that clearance much, much lower when the final assembly has been done. Now, before I go on talking about the big end bearings from the piston rods, you're probably going to be looking at this table wondering, how the hell did this guy get all this stuff so clean? And I can assure you, unlike old projects on the S4, it wasn't by hand. It was my handy dandy ultrasonic cleaner. You will find a lot of Vevor, who knows, ultrasonic cleaners online to buy, but there is only this one that's going to work for items that are as big as an entire head. I've already measured, I can get an entire crankshaft in there. That is the only reason I bought this one. It is the only one that has an inside dimension that doesn't taper too dramatically on the insides, meaning it's almost straight down on both sides, so you can get big objects with flat edges like this in there pretty easily, and it has the depth to cover really large objects as well. You know, I've officially done enough projects in the garage that I can confidently say from experience that you need an ultrasonic cleaner in your life. Gone are the days where I would like spray some degreaser on something and scrub it up and then rinse it and then check, see how it was, and then do it all over again. To hell with all of that. What I do now is just put everything straight into the ultrasonic cleaner. I have a little bit of a mix. I made some shorts about it actually as I was experimenting with cleaning solutions that were effective for different types of metals. You can check them out right here. Short answer is a little bit of Simple Green Aircraft Precision Cleaner Lemon Juice Water. But it comes out really, really well. And it just takes that first 90% of effort right away from you, right off the top. And then whatever's left that's like really hard and baked and crusted on there, honestly, just fill up a bin full of stuff that you took off your project car, take it in somewhere that does vapor honing or something like that, and just get them to sort of blast it off and clean it up really nicely. Don't bother doing stuff by hand. I'll put the link to this exact model of ultrasonic cleaner into the description of this video so you can go pick one up on Amazon. And I would tell you to go get Simple Green Aircraft Cleaner there as well, but honestly, it's not a good value. And trust me, I would love for you to keep shopping and buying stuff on Amazon. I do use affiliate links. I do get a like 2% commission on stuff if you buy it through my link, which is great, but that is not a good use of your money there. If you live near a U-line or don't know what U-line is, go check it out, U-L-I-N-E. There are basically like a direct-to-consumer warehouse that sells you a whole bunch of different commercial products, and you can get a 5-gallon jug of that Simple Green cleaner for like 140 bucks Canadian. It's probably even cheaper in the US. That's the way to go. If you've never seen an engine broken down quite like this before, just know that underneath the piston, it's connected to a rod through the small end using the wrist pin that holds it all together. Then down at the bottom, there's the big circle that wraps around the crank, but this area, the big end as they call it, also has its own set of bearings, and these bearings tell the story once again. So recall again that cylinder 1 was our worst worn one for the bore. Well, this is the bearing set of piston and rod set number 1 as well. Something was definitely wrong up front. These are the only ones that are scored on the bearings, and they're deep too. Like I can scratch my fingernail into this, and you might think a fingernail is pretty small, but in the grand scheme of things, it's like the Grand Canyon. If you can feel a scratch like this, it's huge and deep. There was something crazy going on up here. So check this out. This is cylinder number 8 now, back on the driver's side, right at the rear. Totally different story, and it's only on one half the shells here. I believe this is the bottom side. So the scratches that we see are kind of random, you know, they look like a little bit here, a little bit there, not much of a pattern to it. What I believe we're looking at here are scratches of something that got into the oiling system and into a bearing, just happened to be this one, spun around a little bit before getting ejected, but just tore to shreds in the meantime. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter what happened to any of these bearings. These are all mandatory replacement items when you're doing an engine refresh, so we'll chuck them out, but it's always cool to sort of read the history of an engine. I know the exciting part to look at in an engine is usually, you know, piston and rods, but not a whole lot to report here. The rods in these engines are pretty stout. These are forged rods, so they'll hold quite a bit of power if you want them to. If you want to go absolutely nuts on a build like this, if you're going to boost it though, because you're going to need to lower your compression, you can actually swap in the RS6 C5 piston and rods. Those ones have forged pistons, whereas these are cast aluminum. But for what I'm going to be doing, these will still hold plenty of power, so I'm going to stick with them. Rods were in great shape. I cleaned them all up in the sonic cleaner as well. And the pistons were pretty caked, honestly. I spent a lot of time scrubbing these down by hand with a light scour pad and some WD-40 to eat away that carbon. Sometimes there can be so much gunk on the top of your pistons that, unbeknownst to you, you're actually increasing the effective compression because you've got so much stuff caked up on there. It's actually reducing the amount of room where you can do combustion. So that is a compression razor. Nothing really to report on the camshafts, rocker arms, shafts. That stuff's all good. What's kind of interesting is cleaning up everything here, and I mean everything. I have bins full of stuff that I'm systematically cleaning with the ultrasonic cleaner. And it looks really, really good. Works on plastic and aluminum and steel and everything. Anyways, I've gone through some of the more tricky parts at this point, like for example, the tensioners for timing up in the heads, and everything in here looks really, really good. What I don't want to do though is end up having to buy a new one of these just to replace the guides. That's crazy. I'm not going to do that. I have noticed that you can buy essentially replicant aftermarket pieces just for these plastic parts. And I'm curious to know if any of you have tried those before, because for like $5 or $10, that is an easy replacement, and we don't have to worry about the crazy costs that are associated to the tensioners. Another item I'm really hoping there's an aftermarket replacement for is the little oval metal oil screen that fits right here on the bottom. You guys probably didn't even know that's there, and mine was just shredded. There was no screen, it was not doing any filtering. But again, I'm not gonna buy a whole unit just to get these little pieces. So let me know if you know of a replacement for those screens right there. So that was all the drama that I found on the bottom end of the block, but there's still a lot I need to see for the heads. Now, even though I have some ambitious power goals for this project in the future, I should, if everything works correctly, still be able to reuse all the head components. I don't need to, and honestly, I can't really afford to replace all the valve springs and retainers with like titanium stuff and do a 40 valve job. Like, that just isn't necessary. As long as the guides are in good condition and the valves are seating properly, we should be good to go. But there's a lot of things we need to test in terms of measurements on the guide condition and then how well those valves are seating. So we're gonna do a couple of tests. We're gonna do a bubble test, we're gonna do a light test, and we're gonna do a Prussian blue test. Welcome to the bottom, the combustion side of a cylinder head. No wonder why they call it the 40 valve on these cars. There's 2 exhaust valves and 3 intake valves, which is kind of unique, not super crazy. A lot of engines have different combinations of intake and exhaust valves. But really, this first test is by far the simplest one to do. All we're gonna do is have the head upside down like this, and we'll take a very bright light and shine it up the intake and exhaust ports. And what we're looking for is to see if there's any light that appears around the edges of the valves, because all 3 of these tests that we're about to do is really just to see how well the back side of the valve is sitting against the head. We do not want to see any light coming through here, ideally. All right, in the total darkness of the garage, which is what you need to do, light goes up the intake port in this case, and let's take a look. I know you can't see anything, but that's good, and neither can I. There's no light coming through on that side. No, looks good. Nothing. All right, intake is good on this side. The head is flipped around. Obviously, you can tell we're doing the exhaust now. Let's take a look. Good. 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 All right, we're 4 for 4 here. I'm all set up for test number 2, the bubble test. All I've done is taken an old spark plug and just threaded it upside down, basically, into the bottom side of the cylinder there. And what we're gonna do is take water and fill up the crown area right here. And what I've done with some old pickle lids, shout out to Strub Spear Pickles, the unofficial pickle of Figure It Outie. I've just covered up both of the ports, but I've left myself one little hole right in the middle there, because I'm gonna be sticking my shop air into there and just giving myself a little bit of pressurization to see if any bubbles come out the top. She's all loaded up, as you can see, up to the brim with water. It's a real deal. Here we go. Oh, look at that. Bottom side of the exhaust valve, closest to you. Let's try the intake side. There we go. So on the exact same side, right down there on the valve. Yep. We've got some poor valve seating down there as well. Just on those 2 valves. Interesting. I have a feeling we're about to see more or less the same thing on this next cylinder, but let's give it a go. Yeah, once again we see right down towards the very center, more so on the exhaust valve closest to me, but I can see a little bit of air trying to escape on the other one too. Looks like that's gonna need some work. Let's check our intake side. No, these ones are good. Cool, all right. Number 3, intake side. Yeah, right away. Exhaust side.
Okay, pretty obvious. Number 4 we'll do together, and after this I'll speed ahead and do the other cylinder head on my own, and I'll let you know what happens, but let's see. Whoa, that's the biggest one yet out of the middle intake valve. That's a whole jacuzzi party right there. Exhaust. Wow, and our first completely flawless exhaust side. It's a little random every time.
Just take my word for it that the second cylinder head was even worse. There were 2 intake valves that it was leaking from the entire perimeter. There's just bubbles going like crazy. But on that one, there were no leaks on the exhaust side at all. So some good, some bad. And because of this, the Prussian blue test is a bit of a foregone conclusion. We're gonna skip that one for now. I'll do it again in the next video when we actually start reconditioning the head. But what we would have seen surely is that there would have been little gaps where the blue was not transferred from the valve seat to the bottom of the valve because it wasn't making contact, hence why all the bubbles were slipping around. But there is one more worthwhile test that we can do very quickly to see if the heads and the block are warped or not. The test is pretty simple, but you need to be prepared with a few very specific measurement instruments, one of which is this flat bar here. So unlike just a normal ruler, or if you wanted to use like a level or something that appears to have a flat edge, it isn't like machined within spec flat. So if you buy these specific bars, they are guaranteed to be no more than 1/1000th out of flat, essentially from edge to edge. This is a 24-inch bar so that I can measure a couple different things with this, heads, block, everything. And it just gives you a really flat surface to press up against the bottom of whatever surface. Second item is just a good old-fashioned set of feeler gauges. Now the tolerance for essentially distortion on this engine is 0.1 millimeter, very, very small. So I've got my 0.1 right here. I've got a 0.13 right here. And really the objective is going to be to poke around and see if I can slip in this feeler gauge on any of these points. The other thing is warpage can occur in any one direction. So although I have my flat bar right down Main Street right now, you're going to want to test it back here, up here, do a sideways like this, do a sideways like that, move it around a whole bunch because it can twist in lots of interesting ways. I've been poking and prodding and I found something kind of cool to see. So just for argument's sake, what I have here is my very, very thinnest one. This is way thinner than even a normal piece of paper. It is 0.04 millimeters. And what I noticed is that in some of these gaps that, well, don't look like gaps at all. To the human eye, right under the number 41 there, you wouldn't think that anything could get through. And when we use our thicker feeler gauge, so that it's within spec, yeah, not even close. But look at this. When you take something really thin, it can make it through. It really can. There it is on the other side. So there is some space, and that's okay. But you'd be surprised what you find out with these gauges. Although my maximum spec feeler gauge was still passing under the flat bar on many spots on the block, I also know the entire surface isn't flat with the way my bar is being influenced by the non-machine surfaces, kind of like this area here. I'm done all my testing, and yeah, there were a few spots both on the block side where it mounts to the cylinder head that I could get my feeler gauge through. Likewise, a few here and there on either side of the cylinder heads, but honestly, I don't think there's a big problem. There isn't a Grand Canyon anywhere. That's what we were looking for. We're not in that area, but I'm also going to be bringing the block and heads to a machine shop for some basic work anyways, and it's not like we're not going to deck the block to make sure we have a nice flat mating surface for fresh head gaskets and to remount the head. So we'll take care of that. It's just nice to know that there isn't any crazy damage out there. If you're mid-build or thinking about doing one and you want a set of feeler gauges and a flat bar like I have, just check into the description of this video. Anytime you see a consumable item or piece of shop equipment that I'm featuring in a video, I've always got it down there for you to check out on Amazon. That's it. I'm wrapping this episode here. It's been plenty long enough, but you're going to get a little bit of this and that throughout the series. Sometimes I'll do a deep dive. You'll get like a 45-minute video. Sometimes it'll just be like 20 minutes, which is more so what I think you're going to see coming up on the next one when we tackle the cylinder heads. The next upcoming episode that I'm going to get straight into filming right now after I stop talking is on how the valve train works on this car. We're going to go ahead and take out all the valves, do more measurements with that dial gauge to see how our guides are functioning. I'll show you a couple different tools that you can use to get rid of the keepers when you're pulling off the springs and retainers, because not are all alike, and I've tested a couple actually already behind the scenes. And then we're going to do the work of lapping the valves to much improve that valve sitting that we already know is pretty bad actually on the intake valve. See if we can get to a better place. As always, thank you so much for watching to the end of the video. I know they're long. I hope you learned something in the process. Please subscribe to the channel, like the video, go check out the 4 Rings Club. We'll catch you next time.